V11 Chapter 1. Chapter 1. Preparing for the Unknown Land. After returning from the Empire, Ainz sat at his desk in Erantil and leaned heavily against the back of his chair. While he had already begun recruiting for the newly founded Adventurers Guild of the Sorceress Kingdom, it would take quite some time before the results could be seen. Until then, he would have to amply prepare himself. His top priority was setting up a school to train the adventurers, but if circumstances permitted, he could use the Adventurers Guild itself. It would probably be a sign of hospitality to prepare a hostel for the volunteers who had traveled a long distance to seek him out. Their instructors would be those adventurers who had chosen to remain within the Sorceress Kingdom. I should probably ask Albedo and the others about how to manage the territories. But before that, why did he bring up the matter of vassalage? It'll be troublesome for Albedo and Demiurge, right? Ainz had no idea what Chiknev was thinking. Neither did he know how to explain the situation to those two sagacious individuals. Why had Chiknev made a proposal like that? For all he knew, Demiurge might have been working behind the scenes here. I should have discussed all this with Demiurge beforehand. But he went to a faraway place, and now all I can do is think of how to take care of it between Albedo and myself. As I thought, it's impossible, huh? He sighed internally. His unease and confusion made his non-existent stomach ache. And then, when he thought about what would happen when they returned, the pain intensified. Ainz shook his head, and then considered the information he had learned in the Empire as a way to avoid thinking about what loomed ahead of him. Runes, huh? Bits and pieces of knowledge from YGGDRASIL were scattered throughout this mysterious new world, like stars glittering in the night. He had found traces of other players, the existence of world-class items, and so on. He could now add the existence of runes, a form of writing from Suzuki Satoru's world, to that list. The reason why the people of the theocracy could summon angels from the religions of Suzuki Satoru's world was probably due to magic originating from YGGDRASIL. Then, what about these runes? How had they come to exist in this world? Were the runes in this world the same as those in Suzuki Satoru's world? Or were they simply a form of magical writing which happened to resemble them, and thus the term had been automatically translated as runes? The Dwarven Kingdom is located in the nearby Azalisia mountain range. I'll need to investigate it thoroughly. As I thought, I can't avoid going there, can I? Naturally, Ainz had asked Fluda about runes before returning to Erantil. However, all he knew was that the king who hailed from the Azalisian Dwarven nation had once visited the Empire, that he was a runesmith, and that the Empire purchased weapons and armor from the Dwarven Kingdom. However, about 100 years ago, all traces of rune-carved magic items were lost. While this was very valuable information to Ainz, it was not what he truly wanted to know. There was no runesmith job class in YGGDRASIL. If that's a profession which is unique to this world, then there's a chance that the technology of both worlds might be combined into one. Therefore, I'll need to investigate this matter in greater detail. However, who should I send there? All he wanted was to visit the Dwarven Kingdom and ask about runes and the like. As for the profession of runesmith, well, it was a technical matter and a potential state secret. In the worst-case scenario, he could make them talk by using charm spells and the like if they were very tight-lipped about it. If it was simply a matter of using charm or domination magic, or kidnapping people with teleportation magic, then just about anyone would do. But what if there was a player behind these runes? For all he knew, the person who had brainwashed Shaltir was hiding there. I want to learn more before going in, but it won't be easy to find out about something that even Fluda doesn't know. Ains slowly rose from his seat. In an instant, the woman beside him sprang into action. She had an energetic look on her face that matched the boyish cut of her hair. She was Decrement, Ains's duty maid for the day. Ains reached out a hand to halt Decrement, and then began to pace slowly around in his office. As Ains logically considered the potential profit and loss of this endeavor, old memories sprang unbidden to mind in the gaps between numbers. He recalled the dangers he had encountered in unexplored regions, the joy of discovering new things, the sorrow of failing a quest, and the expressions and words of the comrades with whom he had shared these experiences. They were merely memories, but even his recollections of party wipes were transmuted into a brilliant radiance that lit Ains's empty skull. After he slowly filed away these painful reminiscences away into his heart, Ains's thoughts finally took shape. I guess I'll have to go in, even though I know there might be danger. The guild called Ains Zulgam was an organization which had been founded on those principles. Naturally, some people might scoff at the idea of comparing games which held no danger to their players to reality. Still, hesitation could cost one the chance to gain new knowledge, and result in one losing the initiative. Who could say it was not possible? After he decided to investigate the ruins of the Dwarven Kingdom, a question appeared in Ains's mind. That would be the choice of personnel. Who would be the best candidate to send there? Should I ask the opinion of Demiurge and Albedo? No, if I do that, I won't be able to send out the most capable fighter of all. That person was Ains himself. Ains could say without any false pride that there was nobody in the great underground tomb of Nazarick who was better at him at adapting to unknown phenomena and magic. Simply put, the most efficient course of action was for Ains to proceed by himself. However, if there really was an enemy player there, it would also be the most foolish move he could make. If there's only a few of us, I can at least take them with me when I flee. That means I should pick people who can buy me time while I prepare to make our escape. The first people to appear in his mind were the Floor Guardians. As level 100 NPCs, they would be able to buy time for Ains to escape, even against other players. That said, could he really use the NPCs, the beloved children of his former friends, in such a way? What if I used high-level vassals led by an undead lieutenant? No, their flexibility is too low, compared to the NPCs who were built from scratch. Vassals had the merit of being much more easily disposable, as opposed to the NPCs. But at the same time, their abilities lacked breadth and thus their lack of adaptability was a weakness. When he excluded the emotional side of the issue from his considerations, the NPCs were the ideal choice. Ains the player had not conducted experiments to that effect, and thus he could not be sure if he could be resurrected. However, there was no doubt that the NPCs could be resurrected, as he had done with Shaltir. Ains sat down in his chair once again. Ains steepled his fingers in front of his face, and mulled over the best choice to make. But in the end, he still could not reach a conclusion. Could it be that idiots can't find the answer no matter how much they think? With a self-deprecating smile, Ains looked over to Decrement. Would you be willing to die for me? Of course, Ains-sama. You have but to give the order and I will throw my life away for you. Decrement responded, without a moment's hesitation. Do the others think the same way? Would they think I was a cruel master? I believe everyone else would gladly accept death without a second thought. Nobody would even think of refusing. We were made by the Supreme Beings, and thus we exist only for the Supreme Beings. There is no greater joy for us than to carry out any command they give us. Really now. Also, I was merely asking out of curiosity. There was no deeper meaning to my question. Put it out of mind. As Decrement bowed, Ains made up his mind. he would use the NPCs. Ains pulled out a map of the surrounding area. This map was compiled from the findings of Aura's explorations. In particular, Ains was sure that there was no other map which covered the interior of the Great Forest of Tob in more detail. Sadly, he could not be sure of the accuracy of the scale, and so he could not conclude that it was a perfect map. However, with this in hand, it was much less likely that he would get lost. Ains placed a finger on Erantal, and then slowly traced a line north, passing through the Great Forest. There was no problem up to this point. Most of the forest was now under Nazarik's control. After eliminating the monsters and beasts with low intelligence, they took control of several demi-human and heteromorph settlements, and that was the end of it. There was a large cave underground, but he had no intention of messing with it for the time being. Of course, he could take control of it if doing so was profitable to him. His finger reached the gourd-shaped lake at the northern tip of the forest. Further north of there was the Azalisia mountain range. It was uncharted territory. An unknown region, huh? HMPH, Ains smiled. He had just impressed upon adventurers the importance of exploring the unknown. Practicing what he preached would make for good publicity. Come search for the Dwarven Kingdom of the Azalisian mountain range. It sounded like a slogan one would hear on television shows. He waved away the smile that came naturally, and began his contemplation in earnest. He considered the advantages that would come from personally going to a place where there might be other players. Obviously, having the Saucer King show up in person was a clear sign of his sincerity. It was like a company's boss personally going to another firm to conduct negotiations. The effects of that were immediately evident in Suzuki Satoru's experience. In addition, his perspective was unlike his subordinates, who tended to view those outside of Nazarik as inferior life forms. Ains qualified as a moderate among the members of Nazarik. As a result, he felt that he was not a bad choice for negotiating with the Dwarven Kingdom, or a non-courageous choice, if he was being honest with himself. In addition, he could always send Pandora's actor over. He was the ideal choice, be it in terms of intelligence, adaptability or other areas. However, who will administer this country in the meantime? Somebody else had to answer that question. That person was naturally Ains Ulgaun. I can't do it, Ains screamed internally, over and over again. If he had to pick between the two, he would rather go to the Dwarven Kingdom. More to the point, all he needed to do was to visit once and he would be able to teleport there in the future. If any problems came up, all he had to do was to play his trump card of, "I shall consider this in greater detail back home." Even if the other party countered with, "We hope you will decide on the spot," he could just throw another excuse together on the fly. Ains knew many techniques to escape a situation like that. "I had Ainsek around last time, but now I'll be playing the role of the door-to-door salesman for my wares. It's not like I need to clinch a sale either, so it should be easy." Ains smiled as he took on the expression of Suzuki Satoru the salesman. Then, the context of his smile changed. "Plus, as time goes by, I might be able to hand over the vassalization of the Empire to Demiurge and Albedo, and let them draw up the plans for it. Yes, it can't be helped. It's not like I want to flee from my work or anything." As he fervently made excuses for his behavior, Ains began thinking about the next problem. Who would he take with him? Ains folded his arms with a puzzled look on his face. While he would like nothing more than to have Albedo or Demiurge around, they had more important things to do and they were also project leaders. If he brought either of them along, then problems would crop up in their affairs. Aura and Mare were very good choices, especially because they were humanoid like the dwarves. Thus, their counterparts would not be too wary of them. Cocytus would be tricky. Granted, he was a good pick for visiting a cold and mountainous region, but he was now in charge of the Great Forest of Tob, which also made him a project leader of sorts. Ains hoped that he could focus his energies on that task. In addition, his unusual appearance combined with that of Ains would probably make the other party unnecessarily nervous. Sebas was a good choice too. He was currently providing administrative support in Erantal, with Suarananya as his assistant. It should be fine to bring him out with Pandora's actor around, but Ains had some doubts about his fighting ability. Gargantua and Victim were out of the question, of course. The images of several other NPCs loomed up in Ains's mind, but most of them were not suitable to follow Ains around as bodyguards. If that's the case, then it'll have to be Aura and Shaltia. Aura and the monsters she commanded could be considered an ideal choice for the role of a tank. In the worst-case scenario, he could sacrifice her beasts and escape with Aura. And then there was Shaltia, the best one-on-one fighter. She could serve as a trump card against a strong foe. In addition, there was another reason why he wanted to use Shaltia. He should have brought Mare along instead, considering that he might be facing an army. However, if they encountered a player, their priority would be to retreat and not exterminating the enemy. Thus, he would leave Mare behind this time around. If that's the case, just as Ains was about to make a move, the sound of a message rang within his head. Ains Sama. Oh, it's Entama. Yes. I am currently traveling with Shaltia Sama and we have reached the village of the lizard men. Cocytus Sama wishes to send over a lizardman with a report concerning the village's status and seeks your permission to open a gate. What should be done, Ains Sama? Cocytus would occasionally send over reports on the village which he was tasked to run. Ains did not really know how well Cocytus had done, so typically he would give these reports a quick once-over and reply with the "good job." Quote. There were times that he wanted to say, "You don't have to do this anymore," but reporting to one's superiors was the proper attitude to have, and in turn, he had to fulfill his responsibilities as Cocytus's superior. Then open the gate, at the usual place. No, the defensive spell should still be active. Wait an hour before. Ains took out a schedule sheet and made sure of the time. Cast the spell at 13:46. I will lower the defenses for about 2 minutes at that time. While this building was not Nazarick, it was still shrouded in magical fields which hint teleportation and the like, powered by the MP of high-level vassals. These fields were strong enough to impede fairly high-tier spells, but they drained the vassals to the point where he had to rotate them out several times a day. In addition, they also imped friendly teleportation. This was because of the friendly fire effect, which did not exist in YGGDRASIL. Thus, there were occasions when he needed to briefly disable the defense grid to permit direct teleportation to this place. Of course, lowering the defenses meant that enemies could teleport in as well. In order to keep him from being hit by an explosion, as they called it in YGGDRASIL, Ains decided to limit these brief openings to predetermined periods. Understood. I shall relay your message to Shaltia Sama. Ains replied. Good, before cutting off the message and rising to his feet. I'll leave the choice of my clothing to you. A lizardman is coming as an emissary of Cocytus. Pick something which won't embarrass me. Yes, sir. A fire blazed in Decrement's eyes. Her too, Ains thought, but he did not give voice to those words. A man with no confidence in his sense of style could not say such things. With Decrement in tow, Ains walked while giving orders to an undead being he had created on the fly. Said orders were to inform the undead guarding the Great Hall of this manor about the arrival of a lizardman via gate. As he watched it disappear into the distance, Ains contemplated the effective use of the undead which he had created. If Ains's undead could report to him, then he could place them all over the world and create an undead intelligence network. Unfortunately, that would be very difficult to accomplish. Even if Ains gave a command, the undead could only give vague responses. In addition, it was very hard for Ains to manage the massive increase in the number of undead which he had created. There was always the risk that he might slip up and give an order to a completely unrelated undead minion by accident. In the future, he might be able to set up some sort of system to address this problem, but that was impossible given the present circumstances. Perhaps I could let Pandora's actor handle that sort of thing in my place. But then I'd have to deal with the problem of all the undead he made freezing up when he's not in my form. He would have to consider the matter in earnest after seeking the opinions of Albedo and Demiurge. While pondering this problem, Ains reached his changing room. As usual, the two lines of maids greeted him with eyes aglitter. In particular, Decrement's eyes as Ains's duty maid were practically bloodshot. Ains permitted the maids to help him change while asking about Aura's location. Today, he would wear something in pure white. It seemed too flashy for someone like Ains, who was used to wearing dark browns. On top of that, the maids adorned him with a gigantic necklace made of gold and other metals. It made him worry that the magpies would try to steal it on account of its sheeness. But the part of the outfit that made the least sense was the feathers which protruded from his back. "Am I a peacock or something?" Ains wanted to say, but when he glanced around, he saw a shared look of pride and satisfaction on all the maids' faces. None of them looked worried, or had any expressions that could be considered anywhere close to negative. All of them had the same look of nervous awe on their faces, their cheeks tinged pink. They were like a bunch of fangirls standing before a beloved idol. Is this really all right? Is this really so attractive to ladies? Looks like I have no fashion sense, after all. As Ains waxed melancholy within his soul, the maids finished dressing him up. From the mirror, he noticed that there were feathers sprouting from under his arm, which made Ains think of a monster from YGGDRASIL. Was it an Archaeopteryx or something? I think they were pet dinosaurs for druids. They ruffled when he folded his arms in front of himself, which was quite annoying. But what would they say if he told them, "This outfit won't do"? They would reply with something along the lines of, "How is this unsuitable? Please tell us what clothes we should pick in future." Alright. In the end, Ains decided to cast these bothersome things aside. Let's go. When the appointed time came, Ains felt a magical portal gate open in the Great Hall. While he had already dispelled the magical field surrounding this building, the person passing through the gate did not appear right away, thanks to the delay teleportation spell he had cast. This was the same spell he had used during the battle with Shaltir. Delay teleportation briefly hindered teleportation effects that had their destination near the caster, buying them several seconds of time, which the caster would typically use to flee or prepare an attack. In addition, the spell also informed the caster of how many beings would be teleporting into their vicinity. Thus, Ains knew that only one person had teleported here. Entima might not have come here with Shaltir, but she would probably be arriving soon. Delay teleportation only delayed a teleport. It could not cancel it entirely. Thus, some time later, a black half-sphere appeared in the area of the delay teleportation spell. Shortly after that, a lizardman fearfully poked its head out from within. As he, it should have been a he, right? Looked around, his line of sight met that of Ains, who was seated upon the simple throne in the middle of the Great Hall. Your Majesty, Ains Urgaon. Forgive your servant's rudeness before you. Ains could not fully conceal his consternation at the lizardman's fluent speech. While Zayusu was a cut above the rest of his tribe, this lizardman's diction sounded polished and natural. Is this the result of Cositus's training? The question percolated in his mind, but there was something to do before that. Ains's delay teleportation spell had already told him that only one person would be coming. Once he was sure that nobody else was coming, he ordered a Death Knight standing by on the sidelines to reactivate its magic item. The Death Knight nodded in acknowledgement and strode forth, and then Ains turned his gaze to the kneeling lizardman. At the same time, Decrement, who stood at Ains's side, chimed in with expert timing. "Lizardman, you are granted an audience." This was completely different from how she had been when picking out clothes for Ains. She radiated the air of an icy princess. Under normal circumstances, most people would be upset at a maid in a palace, or a similar location, taking this tone with them. The supplicant might well smirk as he noted that the ruler doing so was accompanied by just a single maid. Alternately, he might pity the sorceress kingdom for having so little manpower that a maid had to perform such duties. However, these lizard men were trained by Cositus, and they fully understood that any of the NPCs was vastly superior to them. Therefore, they did not question Decrement's attitude. "Ah, what a pain. Why can't you two dispense with this nonsense and speak plainly?" "Well, that's what I think, but as the saying goes, when in Rome, do as the Romans do." Ains Ulgaon was briefly troubled by the remnants of the spirit which belonged to Suzuki Satoru the salaryman, but that could not be helped. The lizardman rose to his feet, unaware of Ains's inner turmoil. In truth, Ains could not tell the difference between one lizardman and another. If their scales were a different color, or if they had obvious distinguishing features, brands, or an abnormally large arm. For instance, it might have been possible, but he could not tell you how the lizardman before him differed from any other. In any case, Ains had Decrement command the lizardman to identify himself. Ains-sama graciously permits you to state your name. Understood. I thank you for your magnanimity. Your servant is Kukuzu, former chieftain of the Razor-Tailed tribe. Ains had never heard that name before. Should he openly display his ignorance, or pretend that he knew? Ains chose neither of these, but picked a third option. In other words, he nodded to continue the flow of the conversation. After all, Cositus might have mentioned this during a previous report. Following that, Ains ordered Decrement to have the lizardman tell him why he had come here. What a pain. This was basically how things went whenever he met with a subordinate, his servants. If I wasn't worried about people looking down on the Sorceress Kingdom, I would have suggested doing away with this bothersome business. Just as Ains sighed internally, Decrement gave the lizardman a command. In his mercy, Ains-sama permits you to state the reason for seeking an audience with him. Understood. Cositus-sama, the ruler of our villages and the master of the lake, wishes to present something to His Majesty the Saucer King Ains Ulgaon, supreme overlord and ruler of the great underground tomb of Nazarick, as well as the liege of Cositus-sama. Ains was surprised by how many titles the lizardman had managed to string together, but he did not show it on his face. Instead, he inclined his head toward Decrement, who stepped forward and received a scroll from the lizardman. Then, Ains had to wait for Decrement to return and present it to him before he could finally read it. It was covered in Cositus's script. There were so many numbers recorded within that it would take quite a while to read through it here. Therefore, Ains rolled the scroll back up and gave it to a Death Knight who was standing nearby. Only then could he finally address the lizardman directly. "Well done. Thank you." While that was all Ains could say, he did not intend to end the conversation there. Ains rose from his throne, and spoke to the lizardman. Now then, I will ask you a question, not in my capacity as the Saucer King, but as the master of Cocytus. After all, they say speaking to one's vassals directly will deepen their mutual understanding. The lizardman looked vaguely confused. This was because he had no idea how to handle being directly questioned. At least, that was what he thought was going on, despite the difficulty of reading a lizardman's face. Be at ease. This is not a formal interview. Once you leave this place, no trace of the events here will linger in anyone's thoughts or memories. Neither will I censure you for any lack of respect in your behavior. These words were addressed to Decrement and the surrounding Death Knights, as much as they were directed to the lizardman before him. Now then, how is Zayusu? I understand he has remained within the great underground tomb of Nazarick as of late. Indeed, by your Majesty's grace, he is in good condition. He is the father of a healthy child, and his relationship with his wife is similarly excellent. Oh, is that so? I permitted him to return because his child was about to be born, and now it has. I see, I see. Well, it is good that the happy couple is getting along. There were married people within the guild Ainsurgaon. Ains could not help but remember them. My wife's feeling kind of grouchy became a magic word that allowed anyone to disconnect in the middle of a game, and no one would be able to find fault with them for that. Smiling from the memories of the past, although his expression did not change, Ains continued asking questions. Was the child white as well? Zayusu's wife was the white lizardman. Being that she was a very rare breed of lizardman, she aroused the collector's spirit within Ains, and left a deep impression on him. Yes, Your Majesty. It is as Your Majesty has surmised. While the child will assuredly be a superior individual regardless of whose bloodline it inherits, it would seem it has tended toward its mother's ancestry, being that its scales are snow-white. Oh, so there's only... Ains closed his mouth before he could blurt out. One hatchling. Referring to them as people would probably be more prudent. While none of them would actually express displeasure at his choice of words, that did not mean Ains could casually make mistakes. If his poorly chosen words led to problems in Cocytus's rule, Ains would not know where to begin apologizing. Only one child, then? Yes, Your Majesty. Just one. Oh, I see. Only one child, then. It would seem they differed from reptiles, who had big clutches. Still, as long as the couple had a good relationship, they might well have more children in the future. Ains felt the collector's blood stir within him. He kind of wanted to know if he could have one of them to play with, but forcefully separating a child from its parents was a poor thing to do. However, he had heard that the lizard men had a tradition of branding themselves before traveling on long journeys. If Zayusu's child chose that path, then he might be able to train him up as an adventurer. The Adventurers Guild Ains envisioned was an organization made up of many species. If he could get a rarely seen lizardman in there, it might end up being good for publicity, like an idol enrolling in a school. How are the mother and child? Are they being fed well? Yes, Your Majesty. Many thanks for your kind concern. The mother and child are in good health, and the child looks like it will grow to be exceptionally lively. Really now, is that so? This is certainly cause for celebration. Then, to commemorate the birth of a child with a glorious future ahead of him, permit me to present a gift. However, I am not fully apprised of the intricacies of birth gifts within lizardman culture. Share your opinion with me, then. What would be a good present? It would be terribly boring to give fish or something in place of a birthday cake. He would rather give them something more tangible and permanent. I understand. While my tribe does not have the practice of giving gifts to celebrate births, I feel that Zayusu would be delighted to receive arms and armor. War gear, then. If possible, he would have liked to give something which would please his wife as well, but since armor would protect her husband's life, one could say that it would indirectly make her happy. Just then, Kyuku fearfully spoke up. May your servant venture a question, Your Majesty? What is it? Why is Zayusu worthy of such high praise? The fact was that Ains had no intention of praising Zayusu. He merely thought of him as the husband of a rare white lizardman. Still, he could not actually say that, so he racked his brains for an excuse to give. He is an outstanding man. In truth, I hear that his training in Nazarick has shown admirable results. As such, I shall reward loyalty and excellence with matching largesse. I am eternally grateful for your kind words, Your Majesty. We shall strive to show greater loyalty and devotion in the future. Hold on to that determination of yours. After nodding in a magnanimous manner, Ains considered if there was anything else he wanted to ask. A truly excellent ruler would probably want to hear about the status of the lizardmen's villages and compare it to Cositus's reports. And as such he would immediately have more in-depth questions to ask. However, Ains could not do that. Just as Ains was about to dismiss him, something came to mind. This may not concern your village, but what do you know about the dwarves of the Azalisia mountain range? The village of the lizardmen was located at the base of the Azalisia mountain range. Your Majesty, I have heard about them before. Ains had not expected an answer to his casually posed question. Ains ordered the lizardman to tell him about the dwarves as he rejoiced within his heart. With the greatest respect, your servant submits that the following was merely overheard from an acquaintance. The dwarves are a species which build cities in productive mines, and they use the ores thus extracted to manufacture all manner of war gear. Among those are weapons and armor made of very rare metals. Very rare metals, you say? For a moment, Ains thought that he had gulped in surprise. Those words were extremely tempting to a player that loved collecting rare items. Do you know what these metals are called? Regretfully, your servant does not, Your Majesty. My understanding does not reach that far. Disappointment set in for Ains, and he chided himself for his foolish expectations. While adventuring as Morn, he had learned about metals, but there had been no news about anything harder than adamantite. In this world, even orichalcum and adamantite qualified as ultra-rare metals. It was hard to imagine the exotic metals which the lizardman had described being anything more than that. Even so, Ains could not suppress the swelling anticipation within him. If they were a race that lived within the earth, would they have access to metals which were rare even by Ains's standards? What if this world possesses the prismatic cores of Yggdrasil, and the dwarves are Mingham? Granted, that assumes that there are prismatic cores in this world, but if that was really the case, could it be possible to have them produce a Calorax stone, one of the hidden items of Yggdrasil? The Calorax stone was a world-class item. It could only be obtained by gathering vast quantities of the prismatic cores and then expending a certain amount of them. Usually, that would entail an extremely difficult process, but Ains Ulgan had accomplished it once. They had found a hitherto undiscovered mine for celestial uranium, one of the 7 prismatic cores, and a critical element for the Calorax stone. Under normal circumstances, a guild which found a new mine would thoroughly explore it before selling its ores on the market. That was because tapped-out mines in Yggdrasil would slowly recover and be ready for further harvesting. Ains Ulgan had planned to do just that. That said, the reason why they had managed to attain that world-class item was entirely due to an extraordinary stroke of luck. At first, they had let the prismatic ores trickle into the market, hoping to drive the price up due to their rarity. And then, the large stockpiles of prismatic ore in the great underground tomb of Nazarick underwent a spontaneous reaction. Ains could still vividly recall the bizarre mood in the air, generated by everyone as they realized almost all the prismatic ores had disappeared, and in their place was an item which had rolled to the ground. Should we be happy for this? They wondered as they glanced at each other, a vague look of emptiness on their faces. After that, they used the Calorax stone, when they learned that they could obtain that expendable type world-class item in the same way as before. Then, they tried to produce it again, but sadly, the celestial uranium mine was taken from them, and that dream had gone up in smoke. As Ains and the others saw the celestial uranium being sold at a high price, they were equal parts happy and disgruntled. Given the way it was being handled, there was no way for them to produce a world-class item. A wicked smile appeared on Ains's face as he basked in his memories, and he mocked them in his heart. You idiots! The whole point of monopolizing it is to store up the necessary amount. There's no way you could make it if you put yours up for sale. Unless. Ains recalled Punitomo's words. There should be other sources of celestial uranium besides the one which Ains Ulgaun, we discovered. For all we know, they actually have other mines for it, and they took ours in order to keep it hidden from outsiders, he had said. However, he quickly refuted his own deduction. That was because he learned that the guild in question had used the world-class item, Ouroboros, to banish Ains Ulgaun from that mine. Even if they wanted the ability to reliably produce the Calorax stone, was it really worth expending one of the world-class items known as the 20? He had wondered. TL note, Ouroboros. Ains shook his head, chasing away the memories of the past from his mind. Even so, he could not fully eliminate the idea that had come to mind. Even if there's no prismatic ore there, the dwarves might know about other metals. What if there was knowledge there which had not spread to the outside world? If I used a charm spell or the like, oh, I'm being too hasty. I shouldn't let my imagination run wild. Still, this does involve runes as well. As I thought, this is a top priority and should be addressed immediately. Just then, Ains noticed the lizardman sneaking peeks at him. Apparently he had been lost in a world of his own. It seems I was lost in my contemplation. Tell me, who told you about the dwarves? Your Majesty, that would be Zenberu, a former tribe leader like myself. Ho, that Zenberu, Umu. Are you saying that Frostpain was also a creation of the dwarves? Was it a gift Zenberu gave to Zayusu as a sign of their friendship? He had heard about the origins of the sword from Zayusu. However, it would be wise to ask others about it as well. That was an heirloom from days past, and it did not come from Zenberu. Is that so? It was exactly as he had heard. However, there might be something there which the lizard men did not know about. There are many weapons in this world which could not be made in YGGDRASIL. For example, there's that weapon with the passive ability to cut through defenses. The magic weapons in this world were made by having a magic caster enchant a weapon produced by a blacksmith. In other words, a skilled magic caster was more important than a skilled blacksmith when it came to making a powerful magic weapon. However, there were exceptions to that rule. Fluda could make the stilettos which Clementine carried through his magical knowledge, but the same could not be said for Gazef's sword. Perhaps, Fluda had begun by saying, Gazef's sword was spontaneously created by the natural absorption of mana, or perhaps through the magic of the dragons. Still, I can't be certain that he was correct. There's many things Fluda himself does not understand. Could the dwarves make a weapon like that as well? While I know I'm looking forward to this a little too much, YGGDRASIL's Weapons Guild weapons and a few others aside possessed a data capacity that was determined by the value of the materials used in the construction and the skill of their maker. This data capacity limited the number of data crystals which could be added to it. Thus, rarer metals allowed for the creation of a correspondingly more powerful weapon. The smith was also a key part of the equation. Much like it was in this world, the humanoids called dwarves in YGGDRASIL had bonuses to craftsman-type classes. Therefore, dwarves were very popular among those people who wanted to play weaponsmith or armorsmith characters. That being the case, would they possess weapon crafting knowledge which Fluda did not? Does that mean runes are part of it? Taking control of the dwarves. Not bad. The head librarian and demiurge are conducting experiments with scrolls. Nefiria is working on potions. Fluda is handling magic items. Then I shall let the dwarves take charge of weapons manufacture. All sorts of experiments to strengthen Nazarick were taking place concurrently. Ain smiled in satisfaction as he thought about them. And then, he realized that if the 6 great gods really were players, then Ains might well be 600 years behind them. We may need to spend the next few years, no, the next few decades on technological development. We can't be careless here. For all he knew, others may have noticed those things which even he had picked up on. As a leader, he had to eliminate the baseless notion that he was special or unique. If someone was thinking along the same lines as me, then there'd be a higher chance of discovering something useful among the dwarves. Other players might have asked the dwarves to help develop technologies or commissioned weapons from them, and in the process they would have learned about their application of runes. Should I get Albedo and Demiurge's opinion on this, and ready our forces for a full-scale operation? An hour ago, he was still thinking about visiting the Dwarven Kingdom with just himself and Aura for company. However, given that the Dwarven Kingdom had just gone up in priority, the plan for that excursion had to be remade. He had to learn about the Dwarven Kingdom and ensure that his spy could gather information in a clandestine manner. At the same time, avoiding magical surveillance was very important. The problem now was how long all this would take. If the player who brainwashed Shaltir was hiding there, it would be extremely dangerous to give the opposition too much time. If he took a passive stance, the enemy might well pick the most opportune moment to launch an attack. In order to avoid this, they had to take the initiative and make the first move. So this will be a gamble, after all. An ambassadorial party. We will establish diplomatic relations with the Dwarven Kingdom. If a player launches an attack, it will be a casus belli for us to mount an invasion in turn. We can then dig out the necessary information from the debris. Ains enumerated the things he had to do after meeting the dwarves. 1. Verify the presence or absence of players. 2. Investigate the runes and their origins. 3. Obtain information and samples of their metallurgy and ores. Something like that. However, they would hardly tell all of that to Ains up front. It was only natural to conceal one's technological prowess. Information was more valuable the more hidden it was. If there were YGGDRASIL players who let their knowledge leak out all over the place, Punitomo would surely give them a vicious tongue-lashing. Also, what if I could get them to export weapons to the Sorceress Kingdom so our adventurers could acquire them at a lower price? Pretty attractive, no? But in order for that to take place, I'll have to be on good terms with the dwarves. While I could always take them as slaves within Nazarick, that will be a last resort. I'd like to make my words to Ainzik that much more convincing. Still, all this was ultimately nothing but a conjecture. Lizardman. Does Zenbero know about the Dwarven City? Yes. He told me that he had lived in the Dwarven City for some time. Is that so? Do you think Zenbero would take me there? The lizardman fell into thought, and then tilted his head. My deepest apologies, but your servant cannot answer that question. Of course, I am certain that if your majesty orders something, Zenbero will strive eagerly to fulfill it. However, it has been several winters since he returned from the Dwarven City, so I am not sure how much he still remembers. Really now? Well, if that's the case, I can deal with it using magic. It'll be fine. Control amnesia, might well be able to clear things up. After praying that Ainz at Corfluden knew something about this, Ainz permitted the lizardman to leave.